Meanwhile, back here in Central Texas, more than 100 people came together in Heritage Square in Waco for a candlelight vigil to honor the victims of El Paso. Channel 6's Cole Johnson is live for us in Waco now. And Cole, what was the environment like there tonight?
Chris, it was definitely an emotional night tonight. I went around and talked with some of the Central Texans here in attendance just to ask them what tonight's been like and how they're responding to the shooting and these victims. Here's what they had to say.
I'm sorry that they couldn't say goodbye. That's honestly the part that hurts me the most.
With candles in hand, more than 100 people gathered in Waco, honoring the 22 lost in El Paso.
I was just stunned on Sunday morning. I could barely make myself go to church because I knew there would be singing and I wouldn't be able to join in.
And I thought, how many more people are feeling the sense of fear and urgency that I feel that someone they know might be hurt?
The emotion laid heavy on the crowd, many who are trying to find a way to make change.
There are people that, they show their condolences. They tweet about how sending prayers, and then everybody tries to kind of act like kumbaya, and then next thing you know, it's kind of like they forget about it and it happens all over again.
It's got to be bipartisan, and that means from voters from both parties as well.
A gathering like this showing some that others want to see a difference too.
I think God is with us when we make statements like this.
Seeing people here at things like this just reminds me that there are people who are willing to do something about it and want the world to be better, and that the America I live in isn't just mass shootings, it's more than that.
And that was Cole Johnson reporting for us live in Waco tonight. And those were the thoughts of the people attending that vigil this evening.